from student writers to Pulitzer Prize winners, we've got a lineup we are sure you will enjoy, and we hope you spend a lot of your weekend here. We are very honored this year to have Senator Bernie Sanders here. He was going to be here last year, I believe, but wasn't able to make it, so we are so pleased that he came. He has another event he needs to get to, so we're going to have him just say a few words. He's a pretty busy guy these days, as he has been for a while, but he's a very good friend of the festival and took the time out to be here, and he's offered tremendous support over every single one of these 6 years. So we're happy to have him here tonight to kick off the festival. Senator Sanders.
Fran, thank you. I will be very, very brief because I really don't know exactly what to say. We have a town meeting on broadband tomorrow, so if you want to ask me some questions on universal affordable broadband, I got a great speech, but not for this. I will say this, as somebody who wrote one book, it is a lot harder than you think, and you should be very respectful of writers. I wrote the book and I thought it was over, and of course it wasn't over. You have to revise it and revise it and revise it. It was one of the hardest things that I ever did in my life, and I had somebody helping me write this book. So it was, that's one point, respect writers. Number two, we live at a time where it appears that critical thought seems to be diminishing. And that is that honest people have honest disagreements about everything. We all disagree with each other on many things. But we hope that the disagreements and our opinions are fact-based, that when we bring forth a point of view, it reflects a reality that we can defend. Just take a very brief story, which I think kind of indicates some of the problems we are having. I did a town meeting a couple of weeks ago in Morrisville. We had a wonderful town meeting, and C-SPAN was there, and they videoed it and went all over the country. And in the town meeting, I was asked to comment on the issue of global warming, and I said that, well, we have the entire world scientific community and every agency of the United States government, from the CIA to the Department of Defense, that believes in the reality of global warming. That's on one side. And on the other side, we have Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck, and they don't. And while it is a tough decision in order to decide who might be right, I thought that the scientific community was probably right. Next day, Rush Limbaugh show, because they get this information very fast. As soon as it's on television, they get it. His name appears and that people know it. Rush Limbaugh puts exactly what I said right on radio, and I was very appreciative. 20 million people heard it. I thought it was a pretty good statement. And then what he said, this was interesting. I thought that he would say, well, I don't care what the scientists say, I know this, that. He didn't. He didn't even bother trying to refute that. All he said is, you know what? Sanders is, a lunatic, and the polls show we are winning. And that's probably, I hope not that I'm a lunatic, but the polls do show that their side is gaining steam. It wasn't even bothering having to refute the world scientific community. And I think you're seeing more and more of dialogue, not based on science, not based on fact, but based on a whole lot of disinformation. So I think to the degree that all of us in this room, who may have differences of opinion on, any one of a number of things, but believe that critical thinking and reading and understanding is an important part of what being a human being is about. To that, I congratulate and honor all of those people who put this festival on. So thank you all for what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bernie. You always give us very good food for thought and often a disturbing story or two. Very important to hear. Before I turn it over to the mayor, I just want to thank the many sponsors of this festival. There are also donors, collaborators who have made these 3 days possible. The lighting isn't great here, and it's beginning to be that time in life where I need these. It's a gratifyingly long list, which appears in the program and on signs on display throughout the building. In particular, the organizers would like to express their appreciation to the University of Vermont, and I know the president and his wife are here. We thank them, Cabot Creamery, Mountain Lake PBS, 7 Days, Burlington Telecom, The Point, and of course to Main Street Landing and Melinda Moulton for generously hosting us in these spectacular surroundings, and here at the Performing Arts Center in particular. Also, a heartfelt thanks goes to Lois McClure and Amy Tarrant, without whose support we'd all be somewhere else this evening. And of course to Rick Kasanek, who pulls this miracle off every year. Applause, please. And now, without further ado, a few words of welcome from Mayor Bob Kiss, who's running this amazingly very busy city with all kinds of things going on. Just getting through Church Street was tough tonight. Here you go. Thank you.
Thanks, Fran. Well, we definitely don't want to make things easy. And I think we all appreciate the tips for living that we got from Bernie. I mean, I think being one of 100 people in the Senate of the United States, I think those men and women really face challenges that all of us need to appreciate. And I appreciate that Bernie's fighting on our behalf around things like global warming and facing up to forces that are sometimes unpleasant and difficult, and I'm glad he's there to represent our interests. So I don't think the book festival is supposed to be a political event, but we might as well take that opportunity. I know Madeline's here. She'll probably have a few words of wisdom as well, and we'll go from there. But I do want to acknowledge that as the mayor of Burlington, having a book festival, the 6th edition now, and I'll call it a rare book festival, is something special. And I think it's significant in the 21st century that while all kinds of things around us are moving faster and faster, that we've been able to sustain a commitment to the dedication of ideas and exchange of ideas, and as Bernie said, critical thinking. And we need it, I think, probably more than ever. You know, I returned earlier this week from a trip to Yaroslavl, Russia, which is one of Burlington's sister city, and they were celebrating their millennium anniversary, so a city 1,000 years old. And we were transported there by Delta and Air France. But what I appreciate is that far more often it's through things like books that we're transported to new ideas and new people and unique thinking, and that's what's so critical about the Burlington Book Festival. And it every year now we've been able to put together a weekend that lets us really go far outside of Burlington's sometimes parochial vision to a much broader view. And I'm always happy as mayor to welcome everyone to this event. So Rick, again, a great job putting this together. Support for all the people, the staff and volunteers and sponsors who make it possible. And I'm looking forward to tonight, Galway Kinnell. Looking forward to all the events of the weekend, and I'm looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Kiss. The festival is a product of a wonderful community effort and collaboration. This year, the event has once again been co-produced by Burlington Magazine and the Stern Center for Language and Learning. To say a few words on the importance of books and book festivals in our lives, I'd like to introduce the Stern Center's Director of Professional Learning, Jana Osman.
Thank you. Hi. It's really a privilege to be here tonight, to be celebrating the 6th anniversary of the Burlington Book Festival. The Stern Center is honored to be a partner with the festival. For over 27 years, we've worked to promote literacy for all learners of all ages. Thinking about reading and the right and the privilege and the honor of reading. As a teacher, I worked with a young boy once, and we started to build a bookworm, and for every book that he read, we put the book, a part of the body of the worm on the ceiling. And eventually the worm broke out of the office, and I said, "What would you like to do to celebrate?" He said, "Well, I'd like to have bagels, pickles, and a mango." And so we celebrated this passage of this bookworm breaking through the office of ceiling into the hallway of the school as we sat on the floor and had a picnic of these wonderful delights. Well, eventually, his bookworm made it into the principal's office, and by then he wasn't reading decodable, predictable books. He was reading David Budbill and Gary Paulson, and so the joy and the privilege of reading really did become his, and he became a great reader in his life. I'd like to share with you a wonderful little piece from Patricia Polacca's book, which is hard to pronounce. It's Thank You, Mr. Fokker. But anyway, the story is this young girl is learning to read. She's going to kindergarten, and she's so excited about the possibility that now she will be able to read. And so there's a ritual in her family about literacy and reading. And so the grandfather holds up a jar of honey and so that all the family could see, and then he dipped a ladle into it and drizzled honey on the cover of a small book. The little girl had just turned 5. "Stand up, little one," he cooed. "I did this for your mother, your uncles, your older brother, and now you." Then he handed the book to her. "Taste." She dipped her finger into the honey and put it into her mouth. "What is that taste?" the grandma asked. The little girl answered, "Sweet." Then all of the family sang in a single voice, "Yes, and so is knowledge, but knowledge is like the bee that made that sweet honey. You have to chase it through the pages of a book." The little girl knew that the promise to read was at last hers. Soon she was going to learn to read. And so she struggled to read, and she learned to read. And reading is a privilege as we snuggle up with wonderful books and we chase the information through its pages and we read the wonderful authors who are, in our lives. But as well as being a privilege to read, reading is a right, and we have to work really hard, and I do daily in my life, to promote the literacy learning for all kinds of learners for whom reading has to be a right for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jana. Each year, the festival is dedicated to a Vermont figure who has made a significant contribution to the area of literature or literacy. Organizers are pleased to dedicate the 2010 Burlington Book Festival to Pulitzer Prize and National Book Award recipient Galway Kinnell in recognition of his world-renowned contribution to the art of poetry. We feel so honored to have an artist of his stature as a neighbor and are proud to dedicate the 6th annual festival to him. You can stay put because we got lots more to talk about you. Just hold on. So here's a quick history lesson. Robert Frost was declared Vermont State Poet in 1961. And when he concluded his term, the practice of naming a state poet for some reason concluded as well. At least until 1988, when the most wise Governor Madeline Kunin reestablished the tradition. Now Frost was a tough act to follow, but Galway Kinnell was up to the job and took on the title of Vermont State Poet the following year. So here tonight, we're very honored that to say a few words about the tradition she restored and the artist who upheld it with such distinction is Madeline Kunin.
Good evening. I'm delighted to be here. I hope another year I can be here again as an author. It's in the works. But it's really a wonderful festival, and I congratulate all those who dreamed it up and keep perpetuating this ever-expanding festival. And, as I look at the title, Burlington Book Festival, and as I look at the books out there, I also have kind of a tremor, some apprehension. I'll make a true confession. I'm debating and it's a tough inner debate whether to get a Kindle. And, but I love books. And going into a bookstore in a strange town, I feel at home. It's like going into a church or a museum. You sort of know your way around and you like the smell and the feel of it. So I do know, though, and I read this little squib that some of you may have read, that more books have been published electronically this past year than in hardcover. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I know what's happening now. And maybe some of us will do double duty, that will take the Kindle or its likewise models certain places, but we won't take them everywhere. We'll still want the feel, the texture, the smell of books. And without that adherence, even though I want to call it tradition, without that adherence to what really books have always been and I hope will be, authors will not be here in the same numbers. So we have to figure out a way for either electronic books to be more profitable for authors or some kind of double allegiance to both worlds. But back to Galway Kinnell. You might not think that poets could be controversial, but, well, we do think that. But that they're being named as poet laureate would not be controversial. But in 1988, there were really two poetry societies in Vermont. One was in southern Vermont, and one was in northern Vermont. And when I announced that Galway Kinnell would be the living, breathing state poet, we all loved Robert Frost, but he didn't make too many tours of the schools after his death. I heard from the other poetry group, and they said, "You did the wrong thing. We have our poet." Do you remember his name, Galway?
I do.
What was it?
What was his name? No, I don't remember.
I don't either. Obviously, we made the right choice. But what happened, there was really, as a way to assuage their hurt feelings, we decided to have both poets read their work in Brattleboro at the Brattleboro Museum. And it was kind of a splendid evening. I mean, nobody gave up and said you were right. But it was sort of a Vermont thing. It was not exactly a debate in the political form that we're witnessing right now, but it was a wee bit competitive. But I'll always remember that evening. And, Galway Kinnell has won lots of awards, as you know, the Pulitzer Prize, the book awards, every prize. But he confessed to me one time that his favorite prize award was really being Poet Laureate of Vermont, because this really represents the people. And I think the beauty of his poetry is that it is accessible, but it is also mysterious. But like all good works of literature, it makes us see new truths, new images, new understanding of the human condition. And that is really what our highest hopes of poetry and other forms of literature are. Poetry is a bit more elusive. Sometimes you have to work at it. Sometimes it hits you square in the eyes and you understand it immediately. And Galway's is somewhere in between. He is a little bit like Robert Frost. On the surface, Frost, everybody can quote "the road not taken," and they understand it. But Frost was a much more complex poet than that. You have to dig deeper. And I guess I was introduced to poetry seriously when I was a student at the University of Massachusetts, and there was a poetry series. And one of my most deep memories was sitting at Robert Frost's feet in the faculty club of the University of Massachusetts. And he read every year at Amherst, and all of us UMass students trudged the snowy streets to Amherst to hear Frost speak. So I think hearing a poet speak is even more inspiring than reading him, because you get the passion, the feeling, the complexity of his words. So I look forward in a few minutes to sharing this experience with all of you, to hear Galway Kinnell speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Cunin. And tonight is being sponsored by the University of Vermont, so it kind of makes sense that to make this official, a few words from someone who knows just a thing or two about poetry. Please welcome Major Jackson.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to introduce Galway Kinnell tonight before he reads. Last night was at Boston University celebrating the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Poetry Society of America. A series of programs around the country that they're doing highlighting regional poets. And last night was Poets of New England. Myself, Mary Oliver, Franz Wright, Frank Bedart, X.J. Kennedy, among others, Rosanna Warren, all read. And afterwards, at the reception, a number of us started talking about, well, who was missing? Most prominent among them, now granted, the Poetry Society cannot have all the poets of New England read. That would take us into probably 5 or 6 a.m. in the morning the next day. But most prominent among them was the poet Galway Kinnell, whose name came up as kind of an exercise among us. It would not be an exercise in hyperbole to say that Galway Kinnell is one of the top 3 most important living poets in America today. To sound his name is to name an iconic man of letters, one whose poems are witty, metaphysical, accessible, humorous, and of the highest lyrical order. One, at times, that models in its prepossessing way a kind of aesthetic delight and moral certitude. How did this come to be? The phenomenon that is Galway Kinnell, our neighbor to the north, who has lived in Sheffield, Vermont, with his lovely wife, Bobby Bristol, for a number of years now. Galway Kinnell, born in Providence, Rhode Island, a graduate of Princeton, University of Rochester, who has taught at the University of Chicago, Reed College, Washington, Iowa, Queens College, before beginning his long stint at New York University, who has won the Pulitzer Prize, the National Book Award, the MacArthur Genius Award. Galway Kinnell has lived in France, Tehran, and marched notably along with civil rights workers in the 1960s. How did our neighbor in the Northeast Kingdom come to be one of the most celebrated poets of his generation? For me, he has, over the course of his long and celebrated career, consistently welded the spirit of 19th century Romanticism, especially with all of its celebration of the natural world and the human intellect, matched with this one American ideal of individualism of the best kind, the kind at the personal level, which is to say, not in an egotistic fashion, or even an eccentric stumbling forth towards a recognizable style in his poems. Let me not be opaque. Galway Kinnell has marked the English language in such a way that he makes a sound that is truly and uniquely his own, and reflective of his appreciation for the abundance and bounty of life. If you don't believe me, just recall to yourself quietly the many poems and books that have become canonical and emblematic masterpieces of his highest, and examples of his highest art. The Avenue bearing the initial of Christ into the New World, the Book of Nightmares, The Bear, After Making Love, We Hear Footsteps, Blackberry Eating, Oatmeal, When One Has Lived a Long Time Alone, The Deconstruction of Emily Dickinson, The Sow's Piglets, Escape, Sheffield Guzzle, and Strong as Your Hope. To some extent, his project is an extension of his beloved Walt Whitman, who set out to answer Emerson's call to create a literature that represents our Americans' highest values and virtues. Galway Kinnell is important in our time because he has contributed as much, as handsomely, as winningly to the tradition of American letters. As such, he has unself-consciously, through his writing and teaching, gone on to influence 4 generations of American poets and readers. He encouraged us to listen to the richness of the American language and its various idioms. He's the author of numerous collections of poetry, including recently Strong as Your Hold in 2006, which Tony Hoagland wrote, though shadowed by mortality. Strong as Your Hold also consistently offers a recognition of earthly life as paradise, of nature as bountiful, and of human desire as the greatest blessing and flavor of life. I, who so often wish to float free, he says in one poem, now with all my being want to stay. Galway's work has been anthologized in dozens of books, and his writings have appeared in dozens of periodicals, from the American Book Review to the Yale Review. In 1983, he won that Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award for his selected poems. The New York Times called Galway one of the true masters of his generation and a writer whose career exemplifies what is best in contemporary poetry. There are few others writing today, he goes on to say, in whose work we feel so strongly the full human presence. It is an honor to call him a neighbor, and always a pleasure to listen to him, read from his work. Once I heard him say in a documentary about poetry that most critics and readers will talk about a particular poet possessing a great ear. So attuned they are to a poem's rhythm. But speaking about Walt Whitman, Galway said this: Whitman had a great mouth. He loved words and the English language, and you felt it in his poems. For me, Galway was speaking as much about himself as he was Whitman. Galway Kinnell has a great mouth. Let's listen to our neighbor read. It's an honor to dedicate the 2010 Burlington Book Festival dedication to Galway Kinnell.
Look at that.
Oh, thank you. Okay, thank you. Oh, what a lovely plaque. Oh, sorry, you
No.
are...
No, you stay right here, because all I'm
staying
going to
here,
say.
but I'm just going to say, this is one of the most charming people Vermont has ever seen.
Hardly. But what's really wonderful is after this reading, the organizers wanted me to mention the bookstore is there, and I will usher him out and around to be available to sign books. We are so honored to have such amazing poets in our midst, and you for so many years. It's wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for...
And
Thank
I'll,
you.
just so it's not in your way, I'll make sure that you get it. Or you want it here?
I want
Let's
it
leave it right
here.
here. Okay.
Yes, to glance at when my poems have a weak spot. But I do dearly thank you Rick Kasonic, nice, for your help here in this celebration of critical thinking and reading. It's rather unusual to have something called critical thinking and reading, and yet not have a poet show his head at such an occasion. And so I'm happy for poetry that critical thinking and reading come under their sphere as well. And I want to thank Major Jackson for his wonderful words, and Madeline Cunin for her beautiful and curiously inspiring words, and friend Goddard, Stoddard. Friend Stoddard, we have been on the radio together often, and so I was happy to have you here. But enough of this. I'm going to, in response to your mention of Walt Whitman, I'm going to end this reading on a poem by Whitman, if I remember. I should have said a poem to Whitman and put it here instead of this very useless piece of, useless for the moment, I mean.
Just over, maybe.
Yeah, that's.
How's that?
Yeah.
Is that a little better?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's better. Is this part of it?
I hope not. No, I think that's for a computer.
Oh.
We don't need that today.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to read poems old and new. And I see the time is flying, so I'd better start. And I'll begin with a poem about one of my children. In fact, there are very few of my books that don't have my children wandering through them. And this is one of the first occasions, and it is called Fergus Falling. He was about 8, I think, at the time, and he climbed up to the top, not the top, but halfway up to a pine tree. And the whole, at that time, the whole landscape was filled with pine trees that had been planted by the government because the people were abandoning their farms. But I didn't want to abandon so quickly. So I only left a little cluster of pine trees. And the poem's called Fergus Falling. He climbed to the top of one of those million white pines set out across the emptying pastures of the 50s, some program to enrich the rich and rebuke the forefathers, who cleared it all once with ox and axe, climbed to the top, probably to get out of the shadow, not of those forefathers, but of this father, and saw for the first time, down in its valley, Bruce Pond giving off its little stream in the afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Pond where Clarence Akeley came on Sunday mornings to cut down the cedars around the shore. I'd sometimes hear the slow spondays of his work, he's gone. Where Milton Norway came up behind me while I was fishing and stood a while before I knew he was there. He's the one who put the cedar shingles on the house. Some have curled or split, a few have blown off, he's gone. Where Gus Newland logged in the cold snap of '58, the only man willing to go into those woods that hardly ever got warmer than 10 below, he's gone. Pond where 2 wards of the state wandered on Halloween. The National Guard searched for them in November, in vain. The next fall, a hunter found their skeletons huddled together in vain. They're gone. And Pond where an old fisherman in a rowboat sits, drowning hooked worms, and when he goes, he's replaced, and he's never gone. And when Fergus saw the pond for the first time in the clear evening, saw its oldness down there in its old place in the valley, he became heavier suddenly in his bones, the way fledglings do just before they fly, and the soft pine cracked. I would not have heard his cry if my electric saw had been working, its carbide teeth speeding through the bland spruce of our time, or burning black arcs into some scavenged hemlock plank, like dark circles under eyes when the brain thinks too close to the skin. But I was sawing by hand, and I heard that cry as though he were attacked. We ran out. When we bent over him, he said, "Galway, I saw a pond." His face went gray. His face flooded closed, a frightening moment. Yes, a pond that lets off its mist on clear afternoons of August, in that valley to which many have gone for their reasons, in that valley to which many have come for their reasons, from which many have gone, a few for their reasons, most not, when even now an old fisherman only the pine tops can see, sits in the dry gray wood of his rowboat waiting for pickerel. I read that first because some of you may have read in the papers what is called the abduction, but it's by this time probably the murder of a lovely woman who lived in our village, and we hope comes back to live there again. I wrote this poem when I was teaching in a college, a small college where they didn't have any kind of psychological advisors on their faculty or on their staff. And I was in my afternoon one day, and in came this woman whom I'd seen around, but she wasn't in one of my classes, and she was looking for someone to talk to, and about a love affair that was breaking up, and she was breaking up herself. So I'd never faced such a situation so directly before, and I talked with her quite a long time, and then I knew, or thought I knew, that probably is not enough, and I asked her if she could come back to the campus before 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because I had classes and whatnot. And she said she would, and I knew when she said that she meant it. And that afternoon, she did come back. But as soon as she had left my room in the morning, my office in the morning, I sat down and I wrote this poem. And then I rewrote it, and when she came in, I read it to her. It's called Wait. Wait for now. Distrust everything if you have to, but trust the hours. Haven't they carried you everywhere up to now? Personal events will become interesting again. Hair will become interesting. Pain will become interesting. Buds that open out of season will become interesting. Second-hand gloves will become lovely again. Their memories are what give them the need for other hands. And the desolation of lovers is the same. That enormous emptiness carved out of such tiny beings as we are asks to be filled. The need for the new love is faithfulness to the old. Wait. Don't go too early. You're tired, but everyone's tired, but nobody is tired enough. Only wait a little and listen. Music of hair, music of pain, music of looms weaving our loves again. Be there to hear it. Now, I think I will skip to the escape. The attempts at escape of two of our piglets. Gus, referred to here, was a man older than me, but a man I had encountered and become friends with very early in my residence in Sheffield, Vermont. And we became the closest of friends. And the only trouble was we both smoked, and we talked it over, and so we both quit together. But then some time passed, and he bent over for something, and a stream of cigarettes came out of his pocket, and we said nothing, but we knew it was a horrible thing. And I don't mean to make anything funny out of this. This was a dreadful thing that he did, and he did outlive me. I outlived him by quite a number of years. Anyway, he was a marvelous man, and I will never forget him. When the little sow piglet squirmed free, Gus and I ran her all the way down to the swamp and lunged and floundered and fell full length on our bellies, stretching for her, and got her and lay there, all three of us shining with swamp slime. She yelping, I laughing, Gus gasping and gasping. It was then I knew he would die soon. She made her second escape on the one day when she was big enough to dig an escape hole and small enough to squeeze through it. Every day I took a bucket of meal to her plot of rooted up ground in the woods until one day there she stood, waiting for me, the wild beast evidently all mealed out of her. She trotted over and let me stroke her back, and dribbling corn down her chin, put up her little worried face as if to remind me not to forget to recapture her. Though really a pig's special alertness to death ought to have told her, in Sheffield the Dolce Vita leads to the Lindenville butcher. When I seized her, she wriggled hard and cried, "Wee, wee, wee," all the way home. Now, this poem is set in the McDowell colony in New Hampshire, and I'm sure many of you know that, and doubtless a number of you have been there. It's a place where artists of all sorts could go and live for a month or two or three in the most ideal circumstances any writer, perhaps except Rilke in his tower on the Mediterranean, had ever experienced. And in the morning, your food would be delivered to you, your breakfast would be delivered to you, but I actually wanted to get even more out of this time I had there. So after dinner, I had them move all my goods and beds and chairs out to my cabin in the woods, whereas everybody else had an allotted cabin nearby, and we all got together and ate in the main house. And so after dinner, I would run out there, put oatmeal in a pan, and the heat from the furnace underneath, this is in winter, would produce a wonderful oatmeal in the morning. So that's how I lived. And then the day I was leaving the colony, one of the authors said to me, "Say, Galway, how come we've never seen you at breakfast?" And I said, I ate oatmeal in my breakfast. And he didn't say, "Oh, what a good idea." He lurched back as if struck. And I didn't know what he had in mind, and he didn't tell me, and later in the day off he was. But in any case, the poem goes like this: oatmeal. I eat oatmeal for breakfast. I make it on the hot plate and put skimmed milk on it. I eat it alone. I'm aware that it is good. I'm aware that it is not good to eat oatmeal alone. Its consistency is such that it is better for your mental health if somebody eats it with you. That is why I often think up an imaginary companion to have breakfast with. Possibly it is even worse to eat oatmeal with an imaginary companion. Nevertheless, yesterday morning I ate my oatmeal with John Keats. Keats said I was right to invite him due to its glutinous texture, gluey lumpishness, hint of slime, and unusual willingness to disintegrate. Oatmeal must never be eaten alone. He said that in his opinion, it is okay to eat it with an imaginary companion, and he himself had enjoyed memorable porridges with Edmund Spenser and John Milton. Even if such porridges are not as wholesome as Keats claims, still you can learn something from them. Yesterday morning, for instance, Keats told me about writing the Ode to a Nightingale. He had a heck of a time finding it. Those were his words. "Oi had a heck of a time," he said, more or less speaking through his porridge. He wrote it quickly on scraps of paper, which he then stuck in his pocket. But when he got home, he couldn't figure out the order of the stanzas, and he and a friend spread the papers on a table, and they made some sense of them, but he isn't sure to this day if they got it right. He still wonders about the occasional sense of drift between stanzas, and the way here and there a line will go into the configuration of a Moslem at prayer, then raise itself up and peer about, and then lay itself down slightly off the mark, causing the poem to move forward with God's reckless wobble. He said someone told him that later in life, Wordsworth heard about the scraps of paper and tried shuffling some stanzas of his own, but only made matters worse. When breakfast was over, John recited To Autumn. He recited it slowly with much feeling, and he articulated the words lovingly, and his odd accent sounded sweet. He didn't offer the story of writing it. I doubt if there is much of one, but he did say the sight of a just harvested oat field got him started on it. And two of the lines, "For summer has o'erbrimmed their clammy cells, and thou watchest the last oozings hours by hours," came to him while eating oatmeal alone. I can see him drawing a spoon through the stuff, gazing into the glimmering furrows, muttering, and it occurs to me, maybe there is no sublime, only the shining of the Amnion's tatters. For supper tonight, I'm going to have a baked potato left over from lunch. I'm aware that a leftover baked potato is damp, slippery, and simultaneously gummy and crumbly, and therefore I'm going to invite Patrick Kavanagh to join me. Now this poem is I don't know what it is. It's just a description of picking blackberries and then eating them. But I'm not sure. There's one little item in it that may be an error on my part. But who goes? Here goes. Blackberry eating. I have to go out in late September. No. I got to lift this up here. That's good. I love to go out in late September among the fat, overripe, icy blackberries, to eat blackberries for breakfast. The stalks very prickly, a penalty they earn for knowing the black art of blackberry making. And as I stand among them, lifting the stalks to my mouth, the ripest berries fall almost unbidden to my tongue, as words sometimes do, certain peculiar words like strengths, or squinched, or browned, many-lettered, one-syllabled lumps, which I squeeze, squinch open, and splurge well in the silent, startled, icy, black language of blackberry eating in late September. Now, are we getting on to late September? Yes. I've noticed my blackberries in steep decline recently, in the recent weeks. So this line which I squeeze, squinch open, and splurge well in the silent, startled, icy black language of blackberry eating, must be revised. Because think of even one lover of this poem would, on September 31st, sit down and find these shriveled blackberries. You'd never forgive me. But anyway, I tell you, so you will not have that trouble next year. You may have always wondered why your blackberries shriveled in early September, but this will set you straight. Now, the title of this poem is The Sow Piglet's Escapes. And did I read this poem? Yes, I think so. Yeah, I did, that's right. So I'm going to turn to his two poems in a book called Strong As Your Hold. And here are my children again, still little, even though I wrote this considerably long, after they were just about entering their 40s. Everyone was in love. One day when they were little, Maud and Fergus appeared in the doorway, naked and mirthful, with a dozen long garter snakes draped over each of them like brand new clothes. Snake tails dangled down their backs, and snake foreparts in various lengths fell over their fronts. With heads raised and swaying, alert as cobras, the snakes writhed their dry skin upon each other, as snakes like doing in lovemaking, with the added novelty of caressing soft, smooth, moist human skin. Maud and Fergus were deliciously pleased with themselves. The snakes seemed to be tickled too. We were enchanted. Everyone was in love. When then Maud drew down off Fergus's shoulder, as off a tie rack, a peculiarly lumpy snake, and told me to look inside. Inside the double-hinged jaw, a frog's green, webbed hind feet were being drawn like a diver's, very slowly, as if into deepest waters. Perhaps thinking I might be considering rescue, Maud said, "Don't. Frog is already elsewhere." And going back even further into their childhoods, when Maud was 6 and when Fergus was 4, he had his first birthday party. And I just mentioned before reading it that William Carlos Williams has a poem in which he says, those said to die miserably every day for lack of the small clarifications sometimes found in poems. He was referring to a passage in a poem of his. I didn't borrow it, but I took some phrases from it, and if you know his poem well, you might think I was plagiarizing, but I wasn't. It's called It All Comes Back. So he placed the cake with its 4 unlit candles poked into thick frosting on the seat of his chair at the head of the table for just a moment while Ines and I unfolded and spread Spanish cloth over Vermont maple. Suddenly he left the group of family friends, kindergarten mates, and darted to the table, and just as someone cried, "No, no, don't sit," he sat right down on top of his cake, and the room broke into groans and guffaws. Actually, it was pretty funny. All of us were yelping our heads off, and actually it wasn't in the least funny. He ran to me, and I picked him up, but I was still laughing, and in indignant fury, he hooked his thumbs into the corners of my mouth, grasped my cheeks, and yanked. He was so muscled and so outraged, I felt he might rip my whole face off. Then I realized that was exactly what he was trying to do. And it came to me, I was one of his keepers. His birth and the birth of his sister had put me on earth a second time, with the duty this time to protect them and to help them to love themselves. And yet here I was, locked in solidarity with a bunch of adults against my own child, hee-hawing away, all of us, without asking if, underneath, we weren't striking back too late at our own parents for their humiliations of us. I gulped down my laughter and held him and apologized and commiserated and explained, and then things were set right again, but to this day it remains loose, this face, seat of superior smiles on the bones from that hard yanking. Shall I publish this story from long ago and risk embarrassing him? I like it that he fought back. But what's the good, now he's 36, in telling the tale of that mortification when he was 4? Let him decide. Here are the 3 choices. He can scratch his slapdash checkmark, which makes me think of the rakish hook of his old high school hockey stick, in whichever box applies. Tear it up. Don't publish it, but give me a copy. Okay, publish it on the chance that somewhere, someone survives of all those said to die miserably every day for the lack of the small clarifications sometimes found in poems. Well, I like that applause just then, because it was a moral issue that had been come up, and I was very gratified to hear you all take part in supporting it. And I think I have another moral issue here that, but may not elicit clapping. And you might even disagree with me, with the author of the poem, I should say. A poem about Shelley, the English poet of the 19th century. And you know, he did a lot of things, and nobody complained, because in that time it was thought that whatever great things you did, the greater they were, the more you were forgiven for other things that you did. Shelley. When I was 20, the one true free spirit I had heard of was Shelley. Shelley, who wrote tracts advocating atheism, free love, the emancipation of women, and the abolition of wealth and class. A lively version of Plato's Symposium, lyrics on the bliss and brevity of romantic love, and complex poems on love's difficulties. Shelley, who, I learned later, perhaps almost too late, remarried Harriet, then pregnant with their second child, and a few months later ran off with Mary, already pregnant with their first child, bringing along Mary's stepsister, Claire, who very likely also would become his lover. And in this malaise à trois, which Shelley said would be a paradise of exiles, they made their life, along with the specters of Harriet, who drowned herself in the Serpentine, and Mary's half-sister Fanny, who, fixated on Shelley, killed herself, and with the spirits of adored but neglected children conceived almost incidentally in the pursuit of Eros. Harriet's Iantha and Charles, denied to Shelley and sent out to former parents. Mary's Clara dead at 1, her Wilmouse dead at 3, Elena the baby in Naples, almost surely Shelley's own, whom he adopted but then left behind, dead at 1.5, and Allegra, Claire's daughter by Byron, whom Byron packed off to the convent at Bagnacavallo at 4, dead at 5. And in those days, before I knew any of this, I thought I followed Shelley, who thought he was following radiant desire. Now I think I should have I run on to my time?
No, at least 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes? Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, so I'm going to read at most 10 minutes, and probably less. Let's see. But here's a poem called The Old Sea, meaning the Mediterranean. As most of you know, all of you know probably, Clara Haskell and Arthur Grimio were partners in some of Shelley, many of Beethoven's pieces. And the moment Clara heard Arthur play, she knew their music. That was the music she wanted with her music. And probably some of you, when you were young, met a very interesting person of the other sex and sort of fell in love, but the time was so brief. There was not even time to even indicate that that was in the minds of at least one. And sometimes, if that happens to you, sometimes when you get older, you think suddenly, without intending to, of that strange person. So anyway, I dashed this off, the old sea, it's called. By virtue of a small whirling disk, my hotel room beside the old sea fills with Beethoven's Sonata in E-flat, Opus 12, played by Clara Haskell and Arthur Grumiaux, separate souls who, from the moment their musics mingled, were forever entwined. Outside on the tumbling sea, lighted by lightning bolts, one and then two, that ancient water toils itself all white from seeking the other and finding. Long ago on the deck of a ship, on this sea, next to coils of heavy line, two passengers were leaving Port Said and setting sail for Beirut, and they collided, then separated, then talked all night as if to pass into each other in first love. Do we first love only at first, and then again that flash? Do we always become separated again? She was a petite sœur de Jésus, very French, returning to her quarters in Lebanon. I, in my 20s, shy with women, was vagabonding around the world. The thundering light above the Mediterranean quieted. We too, the only passengers who couldn't afford berths, lay down for the night on our backs, side by side on a shared blanket on deck, telling each other our small mysteries. The entire sky of stars suddenly came out to make legible constellations, although ever since their advent, they have been hurling themselves apart. I did not tell her how she amazed me. I wondered to myself instead what her vows allowed or precluded. St. Elmo's fire glowed. Now that I am old, I think of those two. What was it they lacked? I imagine that someday in the evening, if it should happen that I become even older than I have become, I will give a start as I totter, as old people do, from toilet to sink to icebox to TV, back to chair, at hearing behind me suddenly a hard 10-fingered crashing from Haskell's piano and from Grumiaux's violin, a single hammered chord. I would cry out probably and fall back into my chair and think, but very soon lose track. Well, I know it's not very cheerful. And do I have time to read Gravity? I've never read it aloud, so I'm asking my wife if she estimates it would come in. What do you think? What?
I don't know. Yes.
Okay, those were the yeses. What about the no's? Because I do have a nice poem about a nose. But I'll read Gravity. Upon the star Cygnus X, there should be Cygnus the 10th, I think. Upon the star Cygnus X, which jiggles as if being buffed by a hidden companion. Upon overlapped flesh seeking to become a double chin. Upon a silk stocking the color of bees carefully rolling itself up down a lake. Upon the lecture hall now that the hand signer has turmoiled it for a full hour. Upon the fatty hollow the belly button sits in what is used, when it is used as a sipping chalice. Upon the flesh around a clavicle so shallow it lies beyond the reach of any but a tongued kiss. Upon the tongue which has somehow faddled its way into the lover's mouth and now settled in, lies there, happily sucking unused adipose tissue with its opposite number. Gravity, more or less, suspends itself. So the remaining stanzas take that exact form of, here it says, upon the star, upon this, upon that. And the next one is across the forehead, across the skin, across the face. And then there's one line that completes the poem, and the others are the same. Across the forehead of one who suddenly finds she doesn't have a single love story to tell after 13,001 American nights. Across the skin covering the cerebral cortex of a soldier who always knew life is imperfect and just this minute has been shot in the gut. Across the face of a gravedigger who had just sat down in the shade of a cypress just as the preacher starts his yammer and yak. Across trajectories of basketballs lofted at garbage time. Across the temples of doctors and patient, doctor and patient naking against each other while they study the x-rays. Across the brow of D.H. Lawrence, who hates whatever had got into him that made him in his poem call the earth-lipped fissure which the kingly snake slides itself into a dreadful hole, a horrid black hole. Gravity engraves a not fully erasable frown. In the wings of the Eskimo curlew flapping up the thinning air of the Andes, in the sacral vertebrae of the window stooping to peer under her in the sacral vertebrae of the widow stooping to peer under her drawn blind, in the skin under the eyes of a woman who loves a man who is unable to love her back, and because of that she approaches critical radius and soon will enter isolation of a density as long as two kvetches to live in. Sorry. And soon will yes, I skipped I was about to skip a page. And soon will enter isolation of a density of 100,000 tons per pore. In the saliva collecting in the mouth of the boy sitting in shriek position in a dentist's chair. In the water that breaks through the earth's crust and oscillates in, then out, and then down, almost to the center of the earth. In the cascade of heavy fluid released when a rhinoceros's bladder lets go. In the numeral keys totting up the number of humans, the number of humans have killed in the course of time. In the scratched skin dangling in shreds from children lurching toward the Nakagami River, all screaming together as if this were an aria
they could have rehearsed, gravity trembles in its mathematical helplessness. Now, there is one more section. Yes. In the case of the last ancient trees at Ypres, still turning out their terrified wood, in the case of the concertina wire, standing in high-spirited spirals between the rich and the poor, in the case of howls sent swirling off the earth through madhouse windows, in the case of the word heavenly, when we remind ourselves earth was a heavenly body once, in the case of the unlikeliness of a useful collusion between decay and resurrection, in the case of the man who strays into a gravitational field where the differential between upward pull on his scalp and downward force on his foot soles stretch him into an alimentary canal, the thickness of a thread and a mile long. In the case of a child doing homework on the dining room table when his ink bottle overturns with its cap off, who at once clamps his arms down to the tabletop on both sides of the spill and presses his belly to the table edges, to the table's edge, but watches at the far end of the table the black ink gravitate its way through the ill-carpentered table leaf and spew itself all over the exquisite ancient pink carpet. Gravity would, if it could, recuse itself. And now I'm going to read one little poem as a, did I say I was going to read something? What? Whitman, yes. I'll read a little poem of Whitman, if that is something yeah, here it is. Whitman was the first poet I really, truly loved. And the reason I loved Whitman's poems were that he didn't write in meter, but he didn't write in free verse or any other kind of verse. He just wrote in a way that had been discovered in the 17th century by another wonderful poet who died, and his work was not known until 1929. So Whitman had this whole thing to go through. How do you make a beautiful, flowing, lush poem out of de-dum, 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 de-dum? And everybody from Milton to Blake tried, but Whitman succeeded. So this one page is his farewell that he writes to his reader or to everybody when, as a young man, he is kind of imagining himself to be an old man. The spotted hawk swoops by and accuses me. He complains of my gab and my loitering. I too am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslatable. I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. The last scud of day holds back for me It flings my likeness after the rest, and true as any on the shadowed wilds, it coaxes me to the vapor and the dusk. I depart as air. I shake my white locks at the runaway sun. I effuse my flesh in eddies and drift it in lacy jags. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me, again, look for me under your boot soles. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean, but I shall be good health to you nevertheless, and filter and fiber your blood. Failing to fetch me at first, keep encouraged. Missing me one place, search another. I stop somewhere waiting for you.
Thank you.